Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited to cover all 30 NBA teams in this video as we talk about their NBA tax situations. Now this is a video for basketball sickos. If you don't love the NBA as much as I do, this video is maybe going to bore you a little bit, but there is a really good reason I'm going to record this video and post it currently. The reason for that is going into this year's season, as teams start to maybe think about upgrades and looking at the trade market, thinking about who they could add to their roster, the tax implications are always extremely important. If you're a team that historically stays out of the tax, the only reason to really enter the tax is if you feel you're a true contender. There's a lot of teams on this list that you're going to see are bunched up right by the tax lines and the apron lines. So that is exactly why this video is a perfect one to cover before the year. It gives you a good idea of what your team would maybe be capable of doing throughout the course of the season as the trade deadline approaches, obviously. And with the new aprons, we have a whole bunch of rules when it comes to hard capping. I'm going to try and cover that as best as possible in this video. I really hope you guys do enjoy. Again, this is a video for the basketball sickos. So if you really do enjoy, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content, especially if you are new. Would love to have you be a part of what we do here. And let's take a look at what those cap thresholds here are this upcoming season in the NBA. There are a few different ones to talk about. Obviously, the salary cap threshold itself is $140.588 million this season. That number continues to grow and grow and grow year after year because of the new TV deals and everything that is shaping up to pay the league big money. BRI, basketball related income, is at an all-time high in the NBA. So the players are going to make more money, the owners are making more money. It's a really great spot for the league right now. Everything continues to grow and blossom in the NBA, including the salary cap itself. And remember, there's a cap floor, so about 90% of the salary cap. There's no teams currently below that cap floor number, so there's nothing to really worry about in this video for that reason. Then we have the tax level. $30 million above the salary cap is where you see the luxury tax, and that luxury tax number this upcoming season comes in at $170.814 million. That's a very important number to remember. We're going to have this graphic up on the screen as we talk about a bunch of the other teams, so don't worry, you don't have to memorize this, but it's just a little bit of a precursor before we get into the teams and where they all currently sit. Remember, we're going to talk about all 30 NBA teams in this video. The first apron is at $178.132 million, and this is one of my biggest issues I have with the apron. There's really not a lot of wiggle room. Not only are you a tax team where you're going to miss out on making money after the season if you are in the tax. In fact, you have to write a check to the NBA that gets redistributed across the other NBA teams that aren't in the tax. But you also don't really have a lot of wiggle room to go above the tax into the aprons. Only about $7.5 million is not a lot of money. In fact, that's the taxpayer mid-level exception. So if you're a tax-paying team and you plan on improving your team slightly, you're probably going into the first apron, which is very, very difficult. Now, there's not a ton of teams in the first apron currently, but I do think as time evolves, as we kind of go forward, the first apron is something that teams are going to duck into more and more and more frequently because of how close in proximity it is from a dollar perspective to the actual luxury tax level itself. And then when we look at the second apron, that is another $10.7 million more than the first apron. So at $188.931 million, that is where the second apron begins. A little bit of an early disclaimer, there are 4 teams in that second apron threshold as we currently speak. Let's jump forward now into the first team I want to talk about, and that team is the Detroit Pistons, because they currently are the only team in the NBA with real salary cap space. They actually have about $10.24 million in cap space to work with. The Pistons could look to either add a player right now before going into training camp or before going into the start of the regular season, or what I think is best for them, stand pat, wait around, leave this cap space open. And the reason to do that is to maybe try and take in a contract at the trade deadline. If a team wants to get out of the luxury tax, or if the team wants to get below the first apron, for example, the Pistons could be sitting there waiting to take in that salary and maybe even get a couple of draft picks. Maybe it's a first round pick far out into the future. Maybe it's 3 or 4 second round picks to take in the player. Now, I know Detroit already has been in asset acquisition mode. I think that's really good for them to begin with. And I think with this $10.3 million roughly, they're going to be able to sit there and maybe take in one more contract, maybe even 2 contracts at the trade deadline to help out some other teams, continue to build up your relationships across the league by helping out other teams, other GMs, other executives get things done that they need to have accomplished at the trade deadline. And for Detroit, there's things that you can gain out of it as well in the form of draft compensation. Now we get into the teams that are over the cap but are under the tax. And there is a couple of different graphics here. We actually have 2 graphics to cover all of the teams because there is a whole bunch of them. The Utah Jazz, Charlotte Hornets, San Antonio Spurs, Orlando Magic, Oklahoma City Thunder, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Washington Wizards, the Toronto Raptors, and the Houston Rockets all fit into this category as a team, as teams that are over the cap but under the tax. And it's an interesting situation for all of them for different reasons. Utah's a team that is going to be lined up to have cap space in the very near future. We'll see if they're ever able to get someone to sign in Utah. That's going to be a challenge for them for sure. But the Jazz are an interesting team to keep our eyes on. The Hornets, obviously, with their new ownership, we'll see how they look to function over the next few years. But they could be another team that looks to try and pay big some form or another, whether that's through trade or through free agency at some point. The Spurs are obviously a team that everyone, I think, has their eyes glued to currently. And it's not only because of Victor Wembanyama, but it's because of the ability for San Antonio to pivot and make moves in a variety of different ways. This past offseason, they went out and got Harrison Barnes, Chris Paul, some mentor veterans around their young cast of players, and then they drafted Stephon Castle as well, traded out of the 8th pick for a future collection of assets from the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Spurs really own a lot of future stuff. They own a lot of picks from the Hawks. They have their own draft pick collection. They have a pick swap from the Mavericks. They have a pick swap now from the Wolves. They have an unprotected pick from the Wolves. They've got a whole bunch of different stuff laying in wait right now around Victor Wembanyama. So I think a lot of people are curious, how will San Antonio build? At some point, do they make that big splashy move, or do they really rely on their own internal development and continue to draft with some of those other draft picks that they have coming in? Obviously, there was Trae Young rumors, there was DeJounte Murray rumors. There's been rumors about a bunch of their different pieces that maybe San Antonio would be interested in adding around their 7'5" alien. They haven't done that yet. They'll be an interesting team to keep our eyes on, but they do have a lot of flexibility going forward. Orlando and OKC, I think, are 2 of the most important ones to talk about as we currently sit. OKC, obviously, they're going to have some big extensions due in the near future with Chet Holmgren and also Jalen Williams. But they went on and kind of really pushed their chips in a bit this offseason. Not in the form of draft capital, but more so in the form of cap space and one of their young players, trading Josh Giddey to Chicago for Alex Caruso, and then giving a bag to Isaiah Hartenstein. Obviously, they committed a lot of money there, but they were also able to extend guys like Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe. For the most part, they have their young core locked up and ready to play together for the next 4, 5, 6, 7 years. So I really like their calculated risks on the Caruso trade and also the Hartenstein addition. There's really no long-term risk there, in my opinion, for OKC, especially with the amount of draft picks that they actually own. They could easily reshuffle the deck if they ever need to. And then Orlando, a team that's really rising quickly, a very fast ascending team. With a lot of very good young talent. I think the addition of Tristan da Silva is going to be super helpful for them. I could see Jet Howard playing a bigger role for them this season. I'm a big Anthony Black believer as well. So I'm excited about where Orlando is going. And then just looking at their team, adding KCP as well, they're just flat out a very good team, a very good roster as they're currently constituted. So I think Orlando, with some more long-term flexibility, we'll see if they ever make another big splashy move there. But I like where they're at. Cleveland, another team where it was really big for them to get Donovan Mitchell on that extension. Now there are questions about Darius Garland's long-term future. Will Evan Mobley ever be the full-time center? Does that mean a Jarrett Allen trade ever materializes? The answer might be no to that, because I think Donovan Mitchell really likes playing with Jarrett Allen. So does Evan Mobley become the odd man out? There's a lot of questions there in Cleveland. Now they've done a good job kind of filling out their supporting cast around that core 4 nucleus. Guys like Max Strus, obviously, George Niang. They have a couple of interesting young guys as well. They're on the books in Cleveland. So we'll see what happens with the Cavaliers. But I do think overall their addition of shooting has really helped their core. But I'm not sure if it's ever going to be enough to get over the mountaintop there in the Eastern Conference. Washington's an interesting one as well. I think the Wizards have a lot of sneaky upside over the next 5-6 years. It's not going to come anytime soon, though. They're focused on losing for the next 2 or 3. seasons, but at some point, mark my words on this, Washington is trying to line up for some star in free agency. And I know that sounds crazy, it's the Washington Wizards. But listen, they have Michael Winger manning the ship there in Washington. What was he a part of in LA? Well, he was one of the lead dogs in trying to recruit Kawhi Leonard to the Los Angeles Clippers. And remember, 6-7 years ago, no one was talking about the Clippers as this premier destination. Obviously, they had LA to play with. That obviously was a huge factor in getting both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard at the time. But I think Michael Winger is onto something here in Washington. I think what he's doing is trying to really add a ton of young talent to his current roster, make them an attractive destination for a star in 4 or 5 seasons because of the collection of young talent they're poised to have from high draft picks and the likelihood of having a lot of cap space in about 2 or 3 or 4 off seasons. Depending on how they played things out here, Washington could be a very sneaky destination down the road. Toronto obviously has a bunch of different contracts on the books right now. This is where you start to get to some of those a little bit more expensive teams. Toronto, over $160 million committed to their cap right now, and I'm not really sure what the direction of their organization is currently. I think Masai Ujiri's been really grabbing a lot of talent. I really like Emmanuel Quickley. I think obviously Scotty Barnes is one of those ascending young stars in this league. He's a really great player. Toronto's very talented. It's just how do those pieces all kind of fit together and how do they grow together, I think will be the big question under head coach Darko there, who does a very good job in the player development realm, in my opinion. And then Houston at $164 million nearly on their current roster. This is the dark horse team for next offseason. I'm going to have a video coming out on that. I'm not going to get into it too much right now. There will be a separate video at some point covering the Houston Rockets and their long-term future, including this upcoming offseason, how they could be really dark horse candidate to make something happen in the very near future. Let's jump forward now into some of those other over the cap but under the tax teams. Remember, with their current situation, there are teams that under that $170 million threshold. That's under the tax. So you see how close some of these teams are getting. The Portland Trailblazers at over $165 million committed. Remember, there's that tax level in the upper left corner, $170.814 million. The Chicago Bulls, $166 million committed to their roster. Clearly, they're not in a spot. None of these teams really are probably into going in to that tax level. Indiana historically does not go into the tax. I'd be shocked to see if they do. Now, obviously, they are a team that I would say is in that kind of contender hopeful category. So if there's something that materializes that forces Indiana to go into the tax level, but it's well worth it, I could see Indy doing it. I could also say the same thing about Memphis. Although with these smaller-ish market teams, now Indiana, I think, and Memphis both have really great fan bases. It's just you're not Los Angeles, right? You're not Boston. So are you going to be willing to go into the tax and then maybe even into the first apron long term? That'll be a big question for some of these smaller-ish market teams like Memphis and Indiana. I just don't expect them to go into the tax this upcoming season. That's where we see a team like Sacramento, who already did some of their big bidding with DeMar DeRozan in free agency. They're right up against that tax level. They only have about $1 million to play with here, which makes it very difficult to see them make moves and really add salary to this roster. Obviously, Brooklyn as well, a team that is clearly rebuilding. To have this much money committed to their roster is a little bit concerning as well for the short term. Now, Ben Simmons is a massive expiring contract. Could Brooklyn go out and use that, trade him, and either dump his salary a little bit to maybe get a little bit of relief from where they are currently in retrospect to the tax, or could they flat out look to dump him to a team and take back in money on a longer term contract? That could be another option here for Brooklyn. It'll be fascinating to see how some of these teams operate, including Chicago, who has that big Zach LaVine contract to trade. Could Brooklyn maybe get involved there as a talent grab? I don't really know. It's an interesting situation. I have a Zach LaVine trade video up on the channel. If you want to go check that out, it might be well worth it. It talks about how LaVine's trade value isn't very high, but there's maybe some teams that I could see willing to roll the dice on him as an individual player. It's an interesting video. I would go check it out if I were you, but these teams right now, I don't expect any of them to go into the tax level. So when I talked about in the open about how some of these teams, knowing where they're at right now, really helps when it comes to trade deadline discussion and what players could they go after. You have to keep in mind a team like Brooklyn isn't going to take in $2 extra million in salary. There's no way they're going to be willing to go into the tax. Same with Sacramento. I would be very surprised if they go into the tax. Portland, Chicago, I would be very, very surprised if they become tax teams this season. So you have to keep that in mind when it comes to their trade discussions. Jumping forward now into some of those teams that are over the tax but under that first apron. And again, this is where we get to a little bit of a smaller group of teams. And this is kind of, again, a symbol of how close that first apron is to the actual tax line and how I think that's a little bit of a problem right now. Again, that just narrow $7.4 million difference doesn't really allow a lot of teams to be in the tax, but under that first apron. So we only have 4 examples here in this video currently for this upcoming season. The Los Angeles Clippers are one of them, who massively cut down their tax bill this year after letting Paul George go in free agency, bringing in instead Derrick Jones Jr., Chris Dunn, to name a few of their recent additions. I think the Clippers, honestly, they're not much worse than they were last season. Now, it's going to sound crazy after they lose Paul George for next to nothing, but obviously they did a good job pivoting, bringing in some other pieces to replace his void a little bit, and I think they've reshuffled their team a little bit to rely on Kawhi Leonard being healthy. First of all, that's dangerous. Secondly, having James Harden be your number 2 guy, I think that's something that is doable, but they are going to lose a little bit of that scoring punch from their number 3 option. But instead, they have really improved their point of attack defense. Obviously, with Terrence Mann still on the roster, now you had Derrick Jones Jr., Chris Dunn. They have 3 really feasible athletic options to throw around at teams on the perimeter. Do some more of that dirty work. They got Nick Batum back as well. I really like that. For the Clippers, I think their team is at a spot where they're going to compete still in the Western Conference. Now, it all hinges on Kawhi Leonard. Is he healthy? If so, the Clippers do have a fighting chance. If not, they're probably dead in the water. That's just kind of how it is going to go here, I think, for LA. Just like it has over the last couple of seasons. The Pelicans, a very interesting team. I'm extremely excited to watch this team a ton this season, simply because of the style that they're going to play. They don't really have a true center right now. We'll see if Yves Missi assumes that starting center role or not. If he does, then obviously things are going to go, I think, really well from a rim pressure, rim protection, athletic standpoint for him. But at times he's, going to showcase how raw he is as well. His positioning early in plays, I think, will be a little problematic. His consistency boxing out will be, I think, at times lackluster as well for New Orleans. He's extremely athletic, so if Missi does earn that starting center job, it could be very, very good and very fun for New Orleans, but also there could be some headaches along the way. And I also think for the Pelicans, if he doesn't assume that role, if they play smaller with the core of DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, who played college center, by the way, and Zion Williamson, plus Trey Murphy III being their 6 players who play the most minutes for them this upcoming season, you're going to have a really fun, fast, switchy lineup that can get up and down the court. You're going to shoot a good number of threes around Zion Williamson, really space the court for him, and make it hard for other team centers to have to guard Zion Williamson on a night in, night out basis. You think about facing some of the best teams in the Western Conference. If you're Denver, that means Jokic might have to guard one of Herb Jones or Zion Williamson, and that's not a great matchup for Denver from either a pick and pop standpoint or just an isolation standpoint for Zion Williamson. Think about Minnesota. Who would Karl Anthony Towns guard? Would he guard Zion Williamson? Would he guard Herb Jones? I don't really know. And then when it comes to, obviously, Rudy Gobert, then you're putting him on the other one. It just feels kind of scary for teams trying to defend New Orleans with the spacing and pace that they could play with. I'm extremely excited to watch and see how this team season plays out this upcoming year. Dallas, $173 million committed, almost $174 million. The big addition being Klay Thompson, obviously. I really like the Najee Marshall get as well for the Mavericks. I think they're in a really strong spot going into year 2 of Derek Lively's career. At this point in time, Luka Doncic continues to showcase himself as probably the best player in the world, if not the best. He's a top 3 player for sure, no doubt about it. He's a 5-time first-team All-NBA guy, 5 consecutive seasons of that, and he's just 25 years old. So he's an extremely impressive player. Dallas is a team that, again, you can justify going into the tax. You just made an NBA Finals run. And then Golden State, they lost Klay Thompson. They still have a lot of money committed. I do like some of their additions in Kyle Anderson, DeAnthony Melton. Buddy Hield replaces a big amount of that shooting that they lost from Klay Thompson. Now, they did lose some of that positional size going from Thompson to Hield, but again, they replaced that a little bit with Kyle Anderson's presence. Gives them another playmaker in the front court, which I do like. And if DeAnthony Melton is healthy, he's one of the better guard defenders in the entire association. So I think the Warriors, even though their team's going to look very different this year, And to be honest, I still don't love their overall rim finishing. I still don't love their overall gravity outside of just Steph Curry. Buddy Hield definitely helps, but it replaces some of the void that Klay Thompson was already filling. So I still think the Warriors are a little short, and they have a ton of money committed. We'll see if they make any big trades. They do have some draft assets to work with. They have some young players who have value around the league. They didn't make the trade for Lauri Markkanen, so I'm not sure if one's really ever going to materialize for Golden State to actually do or not. But we will see. We're going to keep our eyes on them. They're an interesting team, and they have about $1 million or so before they get to that first apron number. So just a little bit of wiggle room. Then we get into the teams that are over that first apron number. The New York Knicks are one of them. The Philadelphia 76ers as well. The Denver Nuggets, the Miami Heat, and the Los Angeles Lakers. So these teams are all over that first apron number, but under that second apron number. The only team that's really, really close to that second apron number is the Lakers. $188 million already committed to their roster. They have about $800,000 to play with here, which is not much in the NBA. If you know anything about how NBA contracts work, that's not even 2 months of the minimum, basically. So if you're the Lakers, you have to be really careful here. If you're doing mock trades for the Lakers, they probably shouldn't be taking in extra salary. In fact, they should probably be dumping a little bit of salary in any trade to open up just a little bit more wiggle room if they need to get to a spot. The Miami Heat, for example, over that first apron number, they can afford a minimum contract on top of where they currently sit. There's about a $3.7 million difference between them and the second apron right now, which is a pretty safe spot to be, because in case of an injury, in case you need to add one more player onto your roster at any point this season, you can safely add a minimum contract without going into that second apron number, because that second apron is really scary. And we saw Denver operate in a way where they didn't want to go into that second apron. They passed up on re-signing Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, let him walk to Orlando. We're going to see if that's a good decision or not. I'm going to have a video talking about Denver and their cap space very, very soon. We're going to talk about their luxury tax situation. We're going to talk about if I think they're making the right moves or not long term. It's a very fascinating case study right now with the new CBA. Everything is kind of getting flipped upside down a little bit. Typically, a contending team would not let a KCP level player go. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with Denver. I'm going to have a video talking about them very, very soon. When it comes to the second apron teams, there are a few over the second apron as well. These are the big spenders in the NBA right now. The Milwaukee Bucks at $191.94 million. All four of these teams are pretty thoroughly over the second apron number at $188.931 million. The Boston Celtics, this is the cheapest they're going to be for a while. $196.57 million committed. Remember, Jason Tatum's record-breaking contract extension is going to kick in a year from now, so their number is going to be escalating very significantly. They're going to be well north of $200 million for probably the next 4, 5, 6 seasons at least, if I had to bet. The Minnesota Timberwolves. So this is where things are weird. You have the smallish market team, the Minnesota Timberwolves, paying over $200 million to their roster, obviously coming off one of the best seasons in franchise history, a Western Conference Finals berth. The trade for Rudy Gobert completely vindicated, in my opinion. They're in a really strong spot. Anthony Edwards continues to emerge as a superstar player. Jaden McDaniels is one of the best role players in the entire NBA. Naz Reid emerges as the sixth man. This team's young talent is right there. Their current existing veteran talent is really close and good talent to help you win an NBA championship. Mike Conley, a real winning player. Rudy Gobert, a very big-time winning player. Karl Anthony Towns, I think, exercised some of those demons he had in the playoffs a little bit, had some real timely performances, including against the Denver Nuggets, to supplant the reigning champions in the second round of the postseason. And then you have the Phoenix Suns, and this is where things get scary. They're nearly $30 million over the second apron, and they didn't win a playoff game last year. They're the only team on this list to have not won a playoff game this past season. It's very alarming because Phoenix is a year older now. Now, I do think Devin Booker is a premier top 10-ish player in the entire NBA. Kevin Durant, when he's on the floor, is tremendous, don't get me wrong. But there's a lot of little things that I think there's been slippage in Kevin Durant's game that he does not do anymore that people don't focus on. I was there for 2 of the 4 games in person in the first round of the playoffs against Minnesota. He did not rotate defensively. He, as the low man, didn't care to be completely honest with you. And I think there's a lot of things that the Phoenix Suns have real problems with. Now, they did get better. They added Tyus Jones. They added some more guard depth with Monte Morris as well. They drafted, I think, relatively well, adding in a couple of nice pieces, Ryan Dunn being their first round selection after trading down. I thought that was a pretty savvy move from Phoenix. And then also in the second round, grabbing a big man out of Marquette and Oso Ighodaro, I thought, again, a pretty solid move, a pretty savvy move for Phoenix. The only issue, though, is they're still really, really small. They only have about 3 players on their roster taller than 6'8". They're a very small team, and you think about trying to face some of these other teams in the Western Conference. How are you going to match up with Nikola Jokic? How are you going to match up with the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have a lot of positional size, a lot of physicality, strength? They can really drive and kick the basketball. How are you going to match up with Minnesota, who has 2 7-footers? I think there's going to be some real problems for Phoenix long term, and I think the Suns are in a spot where it's going to be a real uphill battle for them to go anywhere in the Western Conference. We haven't even talked about Dallas, a team that, again, with Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford, PJ Washington, it has a really strong, well-cemented front court. I think Phoenix is really, really screwed. I think that they have way too much money committed to their roster. And I've been saying it since the moment it happened. Trading for Bradley Beal was a disaster. And that's going to be the move that really sinks the Suns' ship. Honestly, I don't really see any way for them to get out of that contract anytime soon. So ultimately, I think the Suns are really in a struggle point right now. And I'm just not sure if there's any way for the Phoenix Suns to fully correct the problems that they have on their roster, given the new CBA, the difficulties in trading. And if you're a second apron team multiple years in a row, you start having draft picks frozen. You can't trade them. They get moved to the back of the first round. The Suns are going to be really in trouble. I could see them in 2030 winning 15, 18 games and having the 30th pick in the draft because their pick got moved all the way back. Well, it would probably be the 32nd pick in the draft. A little bit of a disclaimer on what's going to happen in the NBA in the next couple of years. 32nd pick in the first round. But the Suns, they're just in a spot where things are going to be a real uphill battle for them, and I just don't see any way that they solve their roster problems anytime soon. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you guys did enjoy. Again, this is a video for Basketball Sickos, one that really takes a look at all of the different situations in the NBA, where they're at from a tax perspective, giving us an idea of what could happen this upcoming year for trade situations, and just looking at their long-term futures as well. I hope you guys really did enjoy. If you did, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content, and we'll catch you guys in the very next Utility Sports video.